What's up, everybody? The market is shifting, and do you have the skills, the strategies to adapt to a changing market? It's not like it was. Let's talk about it. Hey guys, Mike Ferrante here with LPT Realty and the Mike team, and we're doing Tuesday training. You can join us live, like a handful of people are here, 11:30 till about 11:50 Eastern Time. If you're watching on YouTube, smash that subscribe button. And of course, follow us on Facebook if you want to know what the next upcoming training is. We book these out in advance. So if you want a topic covered, just go to 21 Mike Team on Facebook. Yeah, we're still carrying the 21 there. So you follow us, the team page there, and see what the next upcoming topic is. And you can also watch these live on Facebook. More and more this year, we're going to have guests on. Today's guest is Ian Jones with the
Hello.
team. What up? Ian is just filled with knowledge. If you look at his glasses there, that's indicative of how smart he is. Ian has what, Ian? How many career sales now?
I think I'm coming up on 450, right around floating around 450 or so.
We'll break 500 this year. So Ian has a ton of experience, especially on the listing side. And that's what we're going to talk about today. As the market shifts, how pricing becomes more important, strategy and skills matter, Ian, because it's not like it was where you pretty much could throw a listing up and it sells. And then the other part of this is it's kind of a good thing that listings aren't selling as fast because it gives us time to leverage our listings. But today I want to focus on the skills, the strategy that it takes in a shifting market. And I'm going to kick it off here and then we'll bounce some ideas off Ian. So, as the market shifts, one of the thoughts I came up with, Ian, is that it's changed. The leverage has changed from speed to strategy. So, the way it was, you put a listing up, you get your multiple offers, you do whatever you got to do real quick. Okay. Because there's just, you might have 2, 10, 20 offers, but now it's more about strategy. And we just saw this on a listing that we did together out in Lorain. Of
Hmm.
course, we're here in Northeast and Central Ohio, and on the western edge of Northeast Ohio is a city called Lorain, which is still a mild seller's market, I would say. Like it's not one of those markets where you're going to get 10, 20 offers, right? But sellers still need to be coached on how to position, how to set expectations because many of them are still living in the past. They're living in 2020 to 2022 where it's like, well, I can price it however I want and the house is going to sell.
Hmm.
Not really happening anymore. So talk for a second about the difference between you have another listing, we won't say the address or anything, but that seller said, no, I want to price way up here. I want you to talk about what you're seeing from a,
Hmm.
first of all, from a listing side perspective on something that was the strategy was sharp and priced right compared to a seller who said, nah, I want to start way up here. We can always come down.
Yeah. So let's start with the good news. Our listing in Lorraine. We talked with this seller. We said, here's the number we think we should be at. Then we went back, then we saw the property in person. We did a tour. We made some suggestions. He did some upgrades. And then we came back to him. We said, we looked at the data again, and we actually think you should be down here for that listing. A little bit lower than what we originally expected. And he said, I trust your judgment. We'll go with that. We put it up on the market, and within 7 days, we had multiple offers because we strategically priced it correctly. Now the opposite side of that coin was I have another listing right now where I put it up on the market a couple of months ago. We were up here. We were like, maybe we can get something before the end of the year. We can get a desperate buyer looking to, put some money away somewhere into an investment property before the tax year ends or something like that. And we started up here and then we came down 5 grand, and then we came down 5 grand again, and then again and again. And it has been slow and steady. And just after the new year, we did one more price drop, and we are kind of right at where we probably originally should have been. And we've got, multiple showings now. Interest is picking up. We have an offer kind of maybe in the works. We'll see where that goes, but it's getting more interest because the price is now more attractive to the buyers and makes more sense to the buyers.
Yeah. So Ian, so going back to strategy for a second,
Mhm.
would you agree that yeah, I had this little phrase in mind, speed is no longer earned, or I mean, it's no longer automatic, it has to be earned. And what I mean by that
Mhm.
is, but the right pricing strategy, of course, the right marketing strategy. But I guess where I wanted to go with this was that the pricing strategy it doesn't necessarily, if you're not priced right, let me start over. You're not priced right. There's no amount of strategy that's going to make up for that. So on listing number two, there's no magic wand that you have in your toolbox. And if a seller is breathing down your neck saying, well, you need to do more, I mean, there is no magic wand. There's no amount of strategy that makes up for an incorrect price. Wouldn't you agree?
I would, because I did those things, and I wanted to, and this seller thankfully was very understanding. He knows I was putting my best work forward, and we still weren't seeing the results. But that's not always the case. I've had sellers in the past who have gone, well, what more are you doing to advertise my home, to market my home? Who are you call, pick up the phone and start calling people and sell my house to them. And it's like, that's not really how this works anymore. Um, so to have that strategy and to your point, that speed is earned. I want that strategy of, hey, if it doesn't sell at this price point and we need to come down lower, we need to have a date in mind of when we're going to do that. Because uh, after 10 days or after 14 days or after 30 days on market, we need to be considering, a price reduction or a price correction, we'll say.
Yeah, yeah. So the strategy, there's no amount of strategy that overcomes the overpricing. And the flip side of that, so if you're working with buyers, something that you said made me want to skip to my third point, which is that days on market is now becoming a negotiation weapon. Okay. And I
Mhm.
love the way I put that together, a weapon, because buyers are starting to ask the questions. Why hasn't it sold? When is the next price drop going to happen?
Mhm.
And, can we throw a low offer? Can we get our terms? The buyers are starting to learn that the market is shifting and that they have more negotiating power. So, you have two different scenarios here. There was one that went over list price because of the strategy. And then there's
Mhm.
another where when you do finally sell that second property, it's going to be a much different conversation. So look at it, put your buyer agent hat on for a second, and tell me what you're seeing both from buyers agents approaching you, or what you're seeing your buyers starting to tell you about
Mhm.
market time.
I'll do you one better. I am the buyer. Right now, I'm actually looking for a home to purchase for myself and my fiance. So I have my buyer's hat on, and I am looking at the market from a buyer's perspective. Um, and just as an example, I saw a house hit the market the other day. I looked at the photos. It looks great. It's a little overpriced, in my opinion. So I'm gonna sit and wait and see if it makes it through the weekend. If it makes it through the weekend, then I'm going to see if it maybe does a price drop in 10 days or so and gets a little bit closer to the value that I think it should be at. So, what you're mentioning is days on market as a negotiating weapon or a tactic, is absolutely true. And from my standpoint as a home buyer currently, I can tell you right now, I'm looking at homes current days on market or total days on market because I want to know why is it been sitting for a long time. There's a house in the town over from me that is a great deal, looks awesome. It's a fixer upper. It needs some updates so I can understand the price, but it's been on the market for 175 days or something like that. And I said there is something else going on with this house. Otherwise, a flipper, an investor, or just anybody would pick this house up and throw money into it because it's well under market value. So what's going on? And so I dove into it, and there's foundation issues and things like that. So immediately looking at those days on market compared with photos and listing price and all that good marketing stuff told me, okay, something's not adding up here. Something isn't glaringly obvious in the photos what's going on, and I needed to dive a little bit deeper. But the biggest kind of red flag there, that blinking red light, was the days on market. Um, and that is something that is going to continue to be a tool and a statistic, we'll say, that buyers are going to be looking at and then questioning and then basing their offers off of. If you have a house on the market for 30, 40, 60 days, 90 days, things like that, they're going to go, well, are they desperate to sell? Can we just throw a lowball offer at them and see what happens? All these questions come up.
Yeah, and it's if you're licensed in the last 5 years, you're probably scratching your head saying, "Gosh, it's never been like this." Those of us like Scott and me, have been around for 18 years, and Scott slightly more than 18 years. We'll just leave it at that. We've seen markets like this where we would sign 6 or 12 month listing agreements because we knew that homes don't always sell in the first week. In fact, that was the exception, not the rule. Multiple offers were the exception, not the rule. So I want to look at this from both listing agent side and buyer's agent side because the negotiation part is what's changing. Okay. The positioning, the strategy, all that stuff is really important. And as we're seeing the market shift, these are important conversations to have with sellers to set the expectation that, hey, these things that I'm about to talk about may occur. This amount of market time may occur. We may have to adjust price if we go too high. And then from a buyer perspective, we need to know what weapons are in our arsenal again. Like for example, I had a conversation with an agent yesterday who said, "Are you seeing contingent offers making a comeback?" Meaning buyer making an offer subject to selling their home. Well, we don't want to divulge confidential information, but we have a deal right now where the seller accepted a contingent offer. So those things are making a comeback. Okay. In the absence of bidding wars, having conversations about financing, contingencies, terms, sellers paying closing costs to buy down interest rates. Although, hey, if you haven't heard, we're back in the fives again. But all of these things are now in play. So it's more of a strategy. It's less take it or leave it from the seller side and more, hey, what can we do to make a deal? So Ian, first to take it from the seller side. If you're sitting down with a seller, how are you setting those expectations to say, look, it's not like it was. And then secondly, if we mess up and price too high, here's what has to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, so that's a great way to look at it. And I always talk with my sellers and I say, look, when we receive an offer, first thing I want to do is I want to present it to you and I want to make sure you understand what is the net number you're getting here. Because it's not just people coming in with all cash, no inspections, no contingency offers, where whatever the number they write on the purchase price is, what you're gonna pretty much earn at the end of the day. I always provide my sellers with a seller net sheet from a title company. I include concessions in there. I include agent commissions, all those sorts of things so that they are aware of what their sort of final number looks like, because I just don't want there to be surprises at the end of the day. It gets we as agents understand the jargon and the lingo and the structure of an offer a lot more than a individual home seller. So to be able to lay it out to them sort of plainly and say, look, here is where we start, this is where we end, and this is the number that is important to you. That is, one of the best ways I go forward with either presenting an offer, or I will sit down with them at the listing appointment and go, here is where you will, uh, here's how much you will earn if we sell at this price, or this price, not including, any seller concessions to buyers or adjusted agent commissions or anything like that. So like always a little asterisk by those numbers.
Yeah.
But it's,
Ian, there's
uh,
something you said about the net sheet that I love because I had a note here that said concessions can be a strategy, not necessarily a loss. So
mhm.
using concessions as a tool to make a deal in the absence of multiple offers and having the leverage that we got really used to for a while, preparing the seller for the eventuality that, hey, we may need to step to the plate with some kind of concession, a rate buy down, paying closing costs, something to maybe repairs, something though to
Mhm.
sweeten the pot for the buyers because they're not used to that. So I think that preparation is really important. And from the buyer side, it's the same thing. I think this is where the skill comes in. I think buyers don't understand all of the tools that are available to them to make an offer that actually could get accepted. It used to be
Mhm.
not that long ago. Hey, come in fast, come in hard, come in with a high number, waive your inspections, minimize your inspections, close fast, give up a lot of earnest money. We were giving away everything to just even get our offer considered, but now that's different. So buyers now have all these different tools available. And so we have to help them understand what those tools are. And that's where the skill comes in. So Ian, I know even you've worked with a lot more sellers than buyers, but as a buyer, how are you thinking about that when it comes to, like, for example, this house you're looking at that's on market? Like, what kinds of thoughts are going through your head when it comes down to, hey, maybe I'll make an offer on this property, and here are some of the things I can do to make the deal better for me. And then, of course, you'll do the same thing for your clients. What are some of those things?
Yeah. So I have a great example. This property that has been sitting for a little while. We got a an offer the other day, or we'll say a verbal offer the other day, and we countered back with a different number, and they countered back with us, but they were then asking for seller concessions. And we said, okay, we can work with that. If your buyer needs, a little help with closing costs and things like that, we can make that work. But why don't we offset those concessions by then again increasing the purchase price? So instead of, X number, we're going to Y number. And basically those concessions are being lumped into the buyer's, you know, 15 or 30-year mortgage payment. Um, it keeps the cash in their pocket now so they can do repairs, they can cover moving expenses, cover agent commissions if they have to, things like that. I think concessions are a really generous way for sellers to be able to uh, give back to the buyer without giving much up, if it's done correctly, I should say. Um, I think a buyer would be more than happy to pay off an additional 4% of the purchase price over 30 years, because what that really looks like is 10, 20, 30, maybe $50 a month, uh, in a monthly payment on a mortgage. So things like that can be really, really useful for sellers to understand what the motivations of the buyer and how we can sort of use those to our advantage, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
No, that's a great way to put it. And I'm going to give a pro tip here. This is kind of a really intricate nuance. But of course, we all have had sellers who say, oh, I don't want to pay their costs. I got to pay my own costs. Why do I want to pay that thing, whether it's buyer agent commission, whether it's closing costs, whether it's point buy downs? First of all, the bottom line is the bottom line. What is that net? Okay. And the second part of it is that these are now it's a tool, and we have to prepare the seller for it. If they feel blindsided by it, you know you're you're going to have a harder time explaining that to a seller. So you want to tell them up front, this might happen, this could
Mhm.
happen, be ready for it, and all you really care about is your bottom line. So the again, it's whether you're in a buyer's market, balanced market, or shifting market, as that gap closes, this is where the skill comes in. This is where really polished professionals are going to rise to the top, where the professionals are going to outdo the order takers. Because face it, for a long time in this market, Ian, a lot of agents were order takers. Hey, I want to make an offer. Great, I'll write it up. Hey, we're in multiples. What's your best? And listing agents were just sifting through the multiples, saying, well, here, this looks like the best one.
Mhm.
But the other part of that now is, as this market gets tougher, the clients want to be led. They want your advice. This is a way to show your value because, frankly, with Zillow and all the other third-party websites available, they can submit offers through portals now. Why do they need us? This is a chance for us to show our value. So, last topic here, I'll kind of open this up for you. how our agents how do we show our value in a market like this? I know I kind of gave broad strokes here, but have you had any interactions with clients, buyers, sellers, where you felt like they didn't really value what you were doing, and then all of a sudden you were like, wow, I was able to swing the bat, get a home run, and they suddenly saw my value.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the biggest touch point here in a shifting market is, again, I'm going to go from the listing side of things. But I want to talk about, pricing strategy and things like that. We have to work with the historical data that we have available to us, and we're looking at 2024, 2025, data, which is still before the shift kind of occurred, right? Um, Quick story, I have a new listing coming up at the end of the month. And when I sat down with the sellers, or before I sat down with the sellers, I should say, he said, I want to make sure that I net X number of dollars. I said, okay, great. Got off the phone, started doing my research, looked at the houses in the area that have sold. Before even seeing the house, I said, maybe we could get to that number, maybe not, but their house is going to need to be like brand spanking new upgraded. And I don't think that's the case. So then I get to and so I prepared myself and I said, here's worst case scenario, here's best case scenario. And I kind of found some in between as well. So then I went and I sat down with them for the listing appointment. And while I was there, I made the decision to go, okay, these comps that I found that have all the brand new updates, those are no longer valid because that's not what reflects this property. Now I'm looking at the older comps that have, dated interiors or whatever you want to call it. And so I was sitting down with him and I said, here is what I think. Here's a couple of comps that I pulled up. Just so you know, I don't think we're going to get to that three, that net number that you were looking for. I almost said a number out loud, which I know we shouldn't be doing. But I don't think you're going to get to that net number. And he said, you know what? That's okay. I understand I might have to take a little bit less because I see what you brought me and I am convinced that this is the correct information. And I showed him the other property. I said, if you want to try and get to that number, this is what your house needs to look like. This is what it needs to present as, it needs to be fully updated. And I don't think you're willing to put in $100,000 into your house to make an extra 25 grand or so. um, so they saw the data of what they were hoping for, and then they saw the data that was most realistic, and it shifted the conversation from, well, here's the number that I'm expecting to get to, okay, my expectations are now a little bit different because you've presented some data to me and you've convinced me that this is the right move to make. So we're listing it at a little bit of a lower price than he was expecting. He's going to probably net a little bit lower than that number he was originally hoping for. But at the end of the day, he's okay with that because he also has the motivation of they bought a house in another state, they have to move, they got to get this house sold. Like there's a lot of motivation there to get it sold as well. So all of that is to say, um, this seller felt very confident in a number that they were expecting to get. And after presenting them with the data and the facts and my opinion of value, it changed their tune, and not in a bad way. I have run into situations where I've gone, hey, your house is not worth as much as you think it is. And clients get defensive. This was not the
Right.
case.
Yeah. So, Ian, it's almost like you're reading off my script here. One of my notes is strategy backed by data, which instills confidence in the client. So,
Mhm.
we'll wrap up with that because we're about out of time. But I want to leave you guys with that. Know your numbers, understand the
Mhm.
nuances within your market. Because, Ian, like we have here, you've got Rocky River, you've got Lorain, you've got the east side of Cleveland. These are all different sub markets within the market. And as agents, we need to be the experts. If you don't have the data available and you don't know how to communicate it to your clients, you won't have that confidence backed by data. So I challenge all of you to do that. run your numbers on your local markets and know the submarkets and really prepare for your appointments going forward. As you have a buyer consultation, as you have listing presentations, have the data. I'm not just talking about running a CMA. I'm talking about knowing days on market like the back of your hand, knowing what's going on within the submarkets. Well, this city may be like this, but did you know that this neighborhood, my neighborhood, Ethan's Green, for example, is like a crazy submarket within a market? So, Mike Pillow down in Apple Valley Lake, he needs to know Apple Valley Lake, lakefront versus non-lakefront. And what if you're just outside? What if you're in Mount Vernon? Is that really the same? I'd say no. I'm not an expert in his market, but that's my challenge to everybody. Know your numbers, really do the deep research, and let AI help you with it, by the way. Ian, any final thoughts before we wrap up?
I think last but not least, it is a shifting market. So setting your expectations with your sellers and your buyers
Yep.
is absolutely the most important thing that you can do right now. Because you need to come off as an expert, you need to be an expert, and you need to convey that expertise that you have and that knowledge base that you have, and make sure you are making your clients comfortable and trusting you in the process in the
Yeah.
same time.
And it's a great tip for newer agents too, because newer agents say, well, how can I instill confidence without experience? So, Scott, you got a quick thought?
I'm going to take 30 seconds. I'll be happy to expound next week if you a little bit more if you want me to, but I know we're out of time. But what Ian's doing is actually marketing. I always tell my people that the best marketing is when you're at the listing presentation and you're you're giving you're giving them an estimate of a logical price. Marketing is nothing more than having a large market, having a large number of people, not a narrow number of people. All this gimmicky stuff that we get in our emails and all this stuff, marketing this and pay, I mean, you know, be, if we scrape all that stuff away, if you've got it priced right, let's face it, you put up a sign and it's going to sell. If it's an MLS, it's going to sell. So what he's really doing, he may not think of it that way, but what he's doing is actually providing marketing by pricing it right. Because marketing is nothing more than creating a market, and that's what creates a market. You know, I can I talk about this all the time in meetings, and I'll be happy to expound a little bit more on that idea at another time if you
Yeah, I
think
love it.
you
Scott, you've
like.
actually given me an idea for next week's training. I'm going to bump next week's training, and here's the question we're going to ask next week. So the seller says to you, apart from setting a price and putting me in the MLS, what else do you do to market my property? So I'll leave you hanging with that one. We got to wrap it up here, guys. Again, you can email me, Mike at 21mike.com, hit the subscribe button, go to 21mike.com and click that button to schedule an appointment. Thanks, everybody. See you all
Thank you.
next
Thank
week.
you, Ian.
Thanks, everybody.